Welcome to the Xeno Podcast, where we try to make sense of the strange. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Tevita Kaili. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
Kaili, all right.
Kaili. Yes.
Associate Professor in Anthropology and Department Chair of Culture and History at BYU, Hawaii. We'll be talking with him about how certain groups view time and space. His highest metrics on RateMyProfessor.com are respected, caring, and amazing lectures. And he has a red chili pepper.
Have you ever looked yourself up on Brigham?
No, I have not.
You should take a look. I mean, it's great. You're doing great on it.
I was looking up stuff. I was like, oh, Tevita Kaili in Google. It came up, RateMyProfessor.com, and I thought I would look through.
Awesome. How long have you worked here?
13 years now. I was a student here at 1990 to 1993. Graduated from here in 93, went on to University of Utah, where I received my master's, and then University of Washington in Seattle for my doctorate in cultural anthropology.
Nice.
What was your major in undergraduate?
So I studied accounting and psychology.
Wow.
And then for my master's, I studied social work. And for my doctorate, cultural anthropology. So
wow.
I went different.
How did that change?
Yeah,
just interests. I have a vast interest in knowledge. I was interested in psychology, social science. Also, I started out at the business because that's why I studied accounting, and my father was an accountant. But then as I took a more general requirement class, then my interests started to expand. And I was like, oh, there's something called psychology or there's social work. And then finally I found anthropology, cultural anthropology, and that's where I'm at now.
And your classes now, what is the focus? Like, what is your specialty?
So my specialty is the anthropology of people of the Pacific. In particular, the people that we call Polynesia, which I call people of the Moana, which is the ocean, and that's the traditional name that was used for Polynesian. And I focus on their culture and their migration, both ancient migration and modern migration, and looking at the way that they think about time and space.
Yeah, you wrote a book that we got to read, and I'm really interested, like, you're talking about moving time and space, and I'm just so interested to hear, like, I guess a deeper explanation into that. So
other scientists have been studying time and space. So Einstein, for example, studied the relativity of space and time, and other philosophers going back to the Greeks and the Romans. And so my study, I was beginning to see how do different cultures think about time and space. So we know that we have this, what we call time and space, but other cultures may arrange it or may think about it in different ways. And, this comes very often when people, go to a meeting and they're like, wow, everybody's on time, or nobody cares about the clock and what time it starts or what time it ends. That's the cultural component of time that I'm talking about. So I'm looking at sort of the social, cultural aspect of time, and also the way we arrange space. You put a lot of people in one place, or only a few people in a certain place, and how many people can you fit in a particular space. So from there to social relations and all of that, all of those things are influenced by how a culture think about the arrangement of time and space.
Okay. Yeah.
So would it be fair to say that scientists are studying more the mechanics of time and space, and whenever somebody comments on the existence of time and space, that's when cultural comes in?
Yes, so scientists are looking at the sort of the ontological aspect of time and space, what time space is in reality, looking at outer space and the way that time travels. But all of those ways of thinking about time and space get filtered through culture. The cultures have a way of saying, okay, now that we know that there's something out there in reality called time and space, how do we make meaning of it? How do we change it? How do we make it work for our specific culture? So yes, when people start talking about it, they're actually talking it from a very cultural way. including the Western scientists, they're talking about time and space in a cultural way. Yeah.
So it's kind of like, and stop me if I'm wrong, but like when people are like, oh, it's just Hawaii time. Like when everybody shows up late, it's like, oh, it's just Hawaii time. Like expect everybody to be like 10 minutes late or whatever.
Yes, so that's, and you know this, if you go to LA or if you go to New York, you notice that the rhythm and the way that people think about space and also the time could be faster or slower. You know that you're in a different time space. And so when people say it's Hawaii, Hawaiian time or Polynesian time or Tongan time, they're referring to a particular way of thinking about time and space. Yeah, and just to kind of, one of the thing is that the people of the Moana relationship was important. So clock time, that's a new way of thinking about time that came from the West. So there's still a way of trying to think about, okay, how do I think about clock time versus just time where I just hang out and be with people and don't really care about the clock.
Yeah. So I think throughout this interview, we can probably get a little bit into the specifics of the differences between, clock time and then like Polynesian time, as you call it.
Yeah.
So your book was called Marking Indigeneity?
Yes.
Okay.
Very good. You're an English major.
Indigeneity.
The Tongan art of socio-spatial relations.
Yes.
So in a very basic sense, what are socio-spatial relations?
Okay, so social-spatial relations is coming from a term is va, which is a pan-Polynesian term. It's saying that when we speak about relationship, we're also thinking about space. So for example, all of three of us here, we're talking to each other, but there's a space, and that space also forms the relationship that we have with one another. So we have the same term for space. So when we say space, we're also saying relationship in a way that we think about space as something that creates a social relationship. So that I created and put the term together to call social spatial.
Okay. So that's va.
That's va.
Va.
And then there's something called ta.
Yes.
Is that?
So ta is the movement within the va. So the action, which is motion, and it's also an expression of time. The way that you move within that space to create relationship, reciprocity, other things, that's ta. So ta would be the movement, and va would be the space that you move in.
Okay. And this whole book is about the relationship between the two. Could you tell us a little bit about the research that you did to come to your conclusions?
Yeah, so I was doing my research. I started in 2002 and looking specifically at Tongan community in Maui. Tongans migrated from Tonga to Maui. There's a big Tongan community there, about 5,000. And I was looking at the way that they were maintaining their relationship within Maui, maintaining their tava, their time space. There, at the same time, there are also other kinds of time space that are happening. For example, work, and the need to do all other kinds of things. So that's my main research was looking at that, and they brought that all the way from Tonga and kind of recreated in Maui. Okay.
So how did the Maui concept of time mix with the Tongan concept of time when they went there?
Okay, so the Tongan concept of time, or the ta, is very reciprocal or circular. So your relationship, you do something for somebody and they do something for you, and then you're trying to keep harmony and balance, and I call it symmetry in my book. So when you move to Maui, there are other kinds of demands on your time and space. For example, work. So you have obligation to take care with other people, such as funerals or weddings, and you have to show up and be part of the rituals and bring things. And at the same time, you have to maintain a job and take the kids to school and other things. So balancing all of those demands on your time and space is what I was looking at in Maui. And Tongans were trying to be creative and trying to figure out ways to expand the time and space so that they could have time to do these things. So I'll just give you an example. Tongan funerals requires a all-night wake, and usually it goes for 10 days, where you just stop everything and you go and you just mourn and grieve, which you can't do that in Maui or anywhere in America because you have to go work. So Tongans are figuring out how do we do this, and so they would do it one night. They would have an all-night funeral. They would take the body to the church, and then after that take it home, and they would stay up all night, mourning, next day buried, and that would be the end. So they've tried to balance American time space, or what I call the capitalist time space, and the Tongan, so that they could be able to find some sort of balance between the two. Very creative, I think.
Yeah. Is it dangerous when you're trying to, make your culture fit with another's, and you're, shortening those 10 days? Or do you think it's smart to prioritize differently?
I think it's just part of surviving. Yeah. I mean, definitely there's aspect of culture that is lost because the time that you get to spend and talk and just eat and just mourn. Yeah. That you can't do that in a capitalist world because time is money. Yeah. Right. So I think the way that Tongans have been able to reconcile, and I talk about this in my book, trying to reconcile or mediate those time spaces so that they could still practice part of their culture, at the same time still practice the culture of Western or capitalism and be able to survive. I think that's what's happening. Yeah.
Okay. So like capitalist world, time is money, and maybe in Moana world, time is relationships.
Time is relationship. Yes.
Fair to say. Cool.
So time is relationship. Spending time with people, talking. I mean, you can talk story for hours. And I saw this in my research where people go to church, and then after church they would bring their food and just eat and then talk story for hours, into the late nights before they would go home, because that time to talk story and to relate to each other is important for them. Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about this idea of like capitalist time and then Tongan time. So how does Tongan work? So I mean, if somebody were to have a funeral, is there just a cultural understanding and then they just don't come to work for 10 days? Or like, how is, I guess, the relationship between time and space with the worker, how is it different in capitalist time versus Tongan time or Moana time?
So in capitalist time, you could probably take 1 or 2 days off the most. If you are a close member of of your family, your work might give you more time. Say, it's your parents or your child. But Tongans think about family in the extended family. So if you're like 5th cousin, it's harder to ask for that kind of time to go to your 5th cousin's funeral. And you could probably get a day, but that's pretty much it. So Tongans have to try to think of other ways to do this. So sometimes they would call in sick and say, I'm sorry, I'm just sick. And this is a way of creating more time. Or, they will find other people to try to take on their shift and things like that. In Maui, most of the women are working in hotels, and then the men are working in construction work, or they're working in yard work, which give them more time to be able, because they're working for themselves. So the different kinds of strategy like that to try to figure out expanding the time to be able to participate in all the rituals that the culture requires.
Okay, so in Maui, it's a new form of time. It's not pure capitalist time. It's not pure Tongan time.
Yeah, I would say that in Maui, what the Tongans are doing there, and I would say this with Tongans everywhere, is sort of fusion of the two to create a time that is both Tongan and at the same time capitalist or Western, so that they could be able to survive in a culture.
So it's all about adapting and prioritizing. Is that kind of the same thing or different?
It is. Okay. It's adapting. It's finding new ways to be able to survive in a new culture, at the same time still hold on to some aspect of your culture. I mean, the other alternative is just to not do all of that and just become part of mainstream American culture. But I think Tongans and other cultures who come are trying to carve a space and time within their community so that they could still practice a sort of a hybrid between Tongan and American world. Yeah.
Okay. Early on in the book, you mentioned this concept of tauhiva.
That's what I was going to ask next. I was I need to know.
Yes.
Again, I don't know how to say all these words, but tauhiva?
Yes. So.
And what is that concept?
So tauhiva is the concept of maintaining relationship with people that you're related to. So if you're related to certain people, there are certain obligations or fatongia that you have towards them. And maintaining harmony and balance in that relationship is important. That is called tauhiva. And Tongans understand that that's very, very important to make sure that you maintain those kinds of relationships. So a funeral, a wedding, a birthday party, you have certain obligation, meaning that you got to go there, you bring food, you have to spend time there, you have to bring Tongan mats and tapa, there's an exchange that goes on. So all of that is all an expression of tauhiva. And so Tongans do that internally in Maui, but they also do it in a transnational way. So they're sending things back to Tonga, like money, and people in Tonga are sending back tapa and other material for the culture. So this is not only a local, but also sort of a global way of relating to each other. So just because your relatives are now living in New Zealand or Australia and Tonga doesn't mean that you no longer have a va or for them. So you got to continue to do that. Yeah.
Okay.
And there are many strategies to do this. For example, maybe you notice this, a lot of Tongans work for the airlines. Part of the reason for working for the airlines so that they could fly to the different activities that are happening in the Tongan diaspora, whether it's in Utah or Sydney, Australia, or Auckland, New Zealand, or in Tonga. They're flying to these birthday parties or these weddings or these funerals using their benefits from working in airlines.
And you said something about the performing arts relating to this idea. Could you explain more about that?
Yes. So if you see any, and I would say Moana performance, it's very synchronized, and I use the term symmetry, just like when you look at a particular pattern, like patterns that you see in tattoo or patterns in tapa cloth. They're all very symmetrical, and so relationship mirror that kinds of symmetry in the way that you move to kind of replicate that symmetry that you see in other kinds of art. So relationship is yes, it's also an art form.
Okay, nice.
Okay, how do you know when it is symmetrical? Or like, how do you tell what is balance? How do you tell what is symmetry?
So the easiest way to think about it is that, I have a funeral and you're my relatives and you come to my funeral and you bring things to my funerals. And then you had your funerals and I don't show up to your funeral. We've already started an asymmetrical pattern here, right? So it's pretty simple because this is the way that people help each other. It's almost sort of an insurance so that you're taking care of each other. So people do know, and they keep track of all of this. When you go help out somebody and that person is not helping you back, the reciprocity is falling apart, and that's when relationship is not symmetry. It's asymmetrical at that time. And so pretty soon people will stop. Pretty soon you won't come to my funeral anymore because you've been coming and, helping out, and I haven't reciprocate back to you. And so that's when the va starts to break down. You see that your movement within that space can either create symmetry or create asymmetry.
Is there a social obligation to, if somebody like helps you out, is an obligation to help them back, or how would you describe
it? It is a obligation. I use the term fatongia, which is a Tongan term, meaning that if somebody comes to help you, you have a obligation to help them. Now, it's not just anyone coming and help you. The first, it's your extended family. They are very important in Tongan Tevita. And then your what I've also seen in Maui is your congregation that you belong to, whether it's a ward or a Methodist congregation or a Catholic group. They are also part of your family, and so they have an obligation. So if it's a different congregation, if it's a different family, your obligation is not as strong in that sense. It's so your genealogical ties or your relational ties to people determines your fatongia, your obligation to one another.
I'm just wondering, how does the concept of ta'anwa and the socio-special relationships, how does that work in charity in Tonga? Like, how does that affect charity, I guess?
Is it kind of like a karma thing? It's like, I give to you, you give to me, you know, like, or the universe. I don't know. Like, is it kind of like that? Or
Yes, I think people see it as a sort of a beautiful. I talk about beauty in my book, where you create this reciprocal mutual relationship, and that people find it to be. The Tongan word is ma'alie, which means the relationship is beautiful, which is what people strive to do. Now, as far as like charity and other things like that, people who come from certain villages send money back. So there's a lot of remittances that go back to Tonga to help with village project, like a new water tank, or we need to create a solar panel for our village. So people who may not be related to the people, but just because they're from the same village, they're sending money back to help them in the work that they do. And so charity also work in a very, very similar way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
yeah.
So this doesn't mean that everything is wonderful, right?
Yeah.
So I'm giving you the ideal, because obviously there are times when relationship falls apart, and that their people are not reciprocating, and they're all these other. But most Tongans strive to tauhiwa, to maintain, and they will sacrifice many other things just so that they can maintain these ties with other people, including work, right? And so other things such as, donating money to the different funerals means that you won't have enough money to do other kinds of things that you want. Yeah. And so people have to balance paying a mortgage, paying for your car payment, school for your tuition for your kids, and at the same time helping out with all of these funerals. So all of these things are delicately trying to balance as Tongan move through their time and space, and sometimes you're not able to pay your mortgage, or you fall behind in your car payment because you had to tauhiwa with somebody's wedding, and it was your obligation to take a gift or things for them. So things are not always great, but people strive and they try to do it the best they can.
Prioritizing and just in different ways, and seeing what's more important than some. I don't know. Cool.
In the case of an asymmetrical relationship, right? Like, maybe I found myself in this relationship. How do you go about reconciling that? How do you go about fixing this relationship?
So the reconciliation process requires the two parties to come together, and they would have to have a talanoa, which is a talk story, to try to decide, how are we going to mend the relationship? How do we bring back symmetry and balance to our va in the way that we move? And people either talk about it, or sometimes they will just show up to your funeral or to your weddings and say, we've decided it's time for us to mend the relationship, get this going again. And then most people are pretty forgiving, and they're willing to work with different families and trying to create these kinds of relationship, because the relationship is important. I mean, your concept of time and space is all about the relationship. So you move constantly thinking about how do you maintain all of this law with different people. Yeah.
So like communication can kind of heal the space that maybe was torn before.
Yes.
Okay.
And I've seen it in Maui where people will go to a particular family and they will present gifts and also, apologize and say, we know we haven't been to your daughter's wedding. We didn't come, but we are here now and we want to continue and maintain this relationship from now on. So things like that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. I had a question about va in itself. So that's the space, but also the relationship. So if I'm physically closer to somebody, like, does that imply that I have a closer relationship with them? Like, if I'm standing really close to somebody talking to them, and I'm not good friends with them, would they think that that's ungenuine or something? Or how does that work in, let's say, like a room?
So
physically?
the va can be physical. Yeah. So we call it va-alfi, which means you're physically close to somebody and the space is pretty close. But that doesn't mean that socially you're close. Yeah. That could just mean that physically you're close. The part that is social spatial is when you take care of it, then you're always, so it doesn't matter if you're living in Australia or New Zealand, your va could still be very close because you constantly maintaining it. You're showing up to their event, they're showing up, they're sending you things, you're sending them. So that is, so there could be a difference between the physical closeness versus the social part of that. Yeah. And Tongans, when they move, doesn't matter how far apart they are, if that social space is still close, it's close. Yeah.
Did you grow up in Hawaii?
So I grew up in West Valley City, Utah, and also Tonga. I went back and forth.
Okay.
Yeah, so I talk a little bit about this in my book. My grandparents live in Utah. My parents live in Tonga, so I have to, move back and forth between the two places as part of Tauhiwa.
Okay.
That's so interesting. You gotta see it firsthand, growing up.
Yeah, so I think my research came because I grew up seeing this. Yeah, I saw how this worked outside of Tonga and then inside of Tonga and all of that. Yeah. So the part of my book that calls this indigeneity. Indigeneity is the idea, the quality of people being indigenous to a place, meaning that they have deep genealogical ancestral tie to a place. And I'm talking about thousands of years of ties. And so for people of the Moana, this is how they survive in this big ocean. They had to maintain those relationship in order to survive. And so this is why I title it Marking Indigenous. This is a way of actually practicing your deep connection to this area called the Moana Nui in Polynesia, which is Hawaii, Tonga, Samoa, Tahiti. All of the islands within that is called Moana Nui and the people who have deep ancestral ties, that's the indigeneity part that I'm talking about in my book. Yeah.
Okay. I was also interested, like, in the, I think you call it communal research.
Yeah.
Like how it's different from, because I view research as like just one guy working in a lab, towards a goal. So if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so communal research is also based on the idea of space, of social spatial, where you go to do research and that it's not just you, but you're researching with the whole community. The whole community are involved. They are also part of your research, but they're also helping you with your research. It takes a longer time because it's easier to just for you just go there, do your interview and leave. But no, you have to take care of your relationship with people. So the people that you research continues to be your friends after that. Yeah. So the Tongans in Maui, even though I'm not related to them, I still maintain ties with them, and they come and visit me, and I go and visit them, and all of these things are still happening. I just sent 2 of my books to 2 of the Tongans in Maui that I was like, here's one book, you can see that I wrote about you and things like that. So that's communal research.
Okay.
Yeah? That your commitment to the participants of your research is very long term in that sense.
So how did they help you, I guess, specifically, or just like telling stories, or?
So they, so the Telex Stories, allowing me to come into their home and talk to them about my particular research. I would ask them questions to think about, and they would, help me unpack some of the Tongan terms in a way that would be helpful. But I also helped them, some of them just needed help. I talked about this in my book, they needed help with setting up a computer, or some, wanted to know, how do you actually use this technology? And back then it was just like simple email, setting up an email account to create, some of the Tongans are just, they're workers. They work in yard and they don't know how to use emails or other things. So I would help them in that way. And so that was sort of the mutual help that was going on in the research. And just through the time that I spend with them, they're more willing to open up and tell me things. And that's the idea of communal research. Yeah.
Okay. And your VA was expanded.
Yes,
it's
VA
always
was
expanding,
and maintaining the balance in the VA and
Nice.
all of that. Yes, all of that from the research. Yeah. Let me just say, it's a lot of work. It's not like I'm talking about it like it's easy and it's fun. And it's a lot of work.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
It's a lot of fun. It's also a lot of work, but that's the kind of work that you have to do in a culture that think about time and space in a very communal way. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not just the individual, but it's the whole community in the way that you work with. Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay, I think I understand mostly VA. I mean, I have a basic understanding, but what was the main differences you saw between Utah, I guess, growing up, and then Tonga in Ta, like in just time in general?
Yeah. So first of all, I'll just say that in Western society, time is always accelerated, and speed is worship. And you can see this in your technology, right? The faster, the better. The quicker you can get through something, the better. Tonga and Ta, very, very slow. And it's like, take your time. Let's have a conversation for 3 hours or 4 hours. That's, in an American context, that's way too long. Yeah. To go to somebody's house just to talk for 3-4 hours. So as far as the rhythm, it's very, very different in that way, and you can see why Tongans want to slow things down, because it's about the relationship. They want to take the time, versus maybe American, time is money. This is important, making a profit, all of this, which is good within a capitalist system, because this is how you create products, and this is how you make things happen and create big technology and great technology. But it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost to people. And I would say also within the Tongan side, things get too slow, it also comes at a cost too. So the way is to how do you find a nice balance between this fast time versus this time that is much slower pace, find some sort of common medium between, reconcile the two. Yeah.
Okay.
As a professor here, how do you see the conflict, I guess, of the two Ta and Va concepts just at the school? I mean, how do you...
I see it in my students. So I have timelines, and I have deadlines, and I have all of this, but I am very much open with letting students have extra time to do things, even assignments and things like that, because I understand that there are many other obligations that they have. It's not just school. To be a good student, you just study all the time and cut out all the social relationships.
Right.
But in the Tongans here will have a very, very difficult doing that. It's not hard for them to just go to the library and just study and cut out all the va.
Yeah.
So as a professor, I try to be understanding with not just the Tongan student, but all of the students. To think about what are all the different kinds of time space that's demanding on them, and how do I become somebody that could say, okay. I mean, I'm saying that you can turn in your paper anytime. I do give extension, but within reason.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Within reason, and I'm not very hard on the deadline or all of those things because I understand how other people may think about time and space. Tava.
Yeah. Wow.
Along with communal research and personal research, do you think Polynesian students, or I guess again the Moana Nui students, do you think it's more common that they have study groups and things than Western students? Like, do you think it manifests itself even in like small stuff like that?
Yes. So study group works well for them. Studying alone in the library does not work. Yeah, because it's much easier to get together with a group of friends and study. And I encourage it for my students: get a study group, get together. Even have food would even be better, because that really helps them with their study because of just the social part of that. Yeah. And that's just the culture of BYU. I hope other students are also learning from each other how to balance all of this. Yeah, the Moana Nui students are learning from the American students, and then we have the Asian students. So we got a whole different three groups. The main three groups are all operating in their own way of thinking about time space. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't work out, right?
Yeah, do you think it's like a miracle we can all get along?
Yes, it is a miracle that everybody's getting along and figuring out how do we balance all of this with one another as people from different cultures, and maybe also at the same time learning how do we relax and take a slower pace to enjoy life, right?
Yes.
And all of that.
I feel like this is gonna change just the way I see the
Yeah,
world.
for
Just gonna
sure.
go around and be like, why are they doing everything?
Like, sometimes you say, it's just so slow. Why is this so slow? Why is this not happening? Why do things move so slow here? And all of that is because it's a different time space here. Yeah.
It's interesting, just individual relationships. Like my Va is different than Jackson's. Jackson's never taken a break in his life, and I'm very much like, I need to feed my relationships with like other people, and like, not to say Jackson doesn't have friends. We're friends, but we're just different, right? Like individuals have different Va's.
And the university is created in a way that the university has its own Taba, and for example, sometimes the university, we want you to graduate in 3 years, or we want to shorten those particular time. And when you do that, that requires you to sacrifice a lot of different other kinds of things.
Interesting.
So, I think with our new administration and the school, we're trying to figure out what would be a good balance in all of that. How does the university's own notions of Ta and Va time space can support a multicultural university.
Yeah, I think at this university, they're really good about having really strong relationships with professors, because I've just talked to my friends at other professors or at other universities, and I mean, class size is one issue, but not a lot of them really know their professors. Like, they have like one or two that like maybe kind of know, but I feel like I know everybody. I could I could approach all of my professors, and it's
great.
Very friendly.
Yeah.
I mean, we're doing this podcast. Like, I mean, people are willing to come talk to us. Like, we're nobodies, kind of like we haven't even graduated yet. So that's just awesome. Like, this is a great campus.
Yes,
so,
it is. It is great here.
Plug for BYU.
What's next for you?
Yeah.
What's your...
Well, now I'm looking at people's relationship, their tawa with the environment.
Okay.
So my book was mainly about people, social spatial relation. Now I'm looking at how do you take care of that va with the environment, the ocean, for example, or the mountains. We have some environmental problems that's happening today, and I want people to think about, if you have ties to a particular place, or you feel like you connect to a particular place, that you have a fatongia, an obligation to maintain a reciprocal relationship to those particular places, like caring for our ocean and things like that. And so that's kind of the next phase of my research, is looking at that particular area.
Awesome.
Okay.
So
So like
cool.
recognizing what the earth has given to you, and like giving
Yes.
so that's the va.
So the ocean, the earth, Mother Earth, is giving us so much, right? She's giving us, and we have to reciprocate to Mother Earth also, and take care and find some sort of balance in our relationship to to Mother, whether that's through recycling or taking care of our beaches with all the plastics that you see every time you go to swim. All of that is a social spatial relationship, a Tava relationship that I think that would be great for everyone to think about. So it's just, I'm taking sort of a Tongan kind of idea of this and hoping that other people will also see it, because I think people will find it to resonate with them.
Absolutely. So, well, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time out of your schedule to do this. So that's
well, thank you so
awesome.
much for it's an honor for me to have you both come and be interested and
Absolutely.
I actually read my book.
Yes.
Sometimes I wonder if people understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But I'm
Absolutely.
glad that you read it and you asked some really good questions. So thank you.
Yeah. How can people find out more about your book? And
Okay, so my book, you can buy it on Amazon. It's in our bookstore. We have several copies in our library, and also our library has a link, online link to it. So you know, if you a student, you can get a free copy of my book through our
Awesome.
library.
Great.
all right. And so, Marking Indigeneity, the Tongan Art of Socio-Spatial Relations by Dr. Tevita Kaili.
Thanks for tuning in. This was the Xeno Podcast. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Xeno Podcast.
That's XENO Podcast. If you have any questions or comments about what we talked about today, or suggestions for future episodes, you can email us at podcastzeno@gmail.com.
This podcast was brought to you by BYU Hawaii's Reading and Writing Center. Thanks for learning by listening.